is Radio Prague International, coming to you from the Czech capital.
Hello and welcome to Radio Prague International. I'm Daniela Lazarová. Coming up in today's program, Czech Foreign Minister Petr Macinka addressed the UN Security Council in New York at a time of rising international tensions. What was his message to the world superpowers? We'll tell you. And the Czech Senate is celebrating 30 years of existence. What is its main role in Czech politics? We'll hear from a commentator. Later on, Folimanka will take you on a trip to Prague's Folimanka Park, one of the places in Prague that captivated Dan Brown and one that appears in his latest novel, The Secret of Secrets. Stay with us to find out what's special about it. All that coming up, but first, the news with Romana Grajcerová.
News.
Czechia should be responsible and spend more on defense, President Petr Pavel said today during a visit to Estonia, where he met his Estonian counterpart Alar Karis. According to him, the Czech Republic should increase spending primarily not to meet NATO requirements, but to ensure its own security. Estonia will spend 5.4% of its gross domestic product on defense this year, making it one of the alliance's top performers. According to NATO assessments, Czechia will spend 1.78% of GDP on defense, which does not meet the 2% commitment stemming from NATO membership. 6 EU member states, including the Czech Republic, have called on the European Union to protect their heavy industry from costs linked to carbon emissions. According to them, climate policy must reflect the new reality, especially current geopolitical crisis and extremely high energy prices. In a so-called non-paper, the countries call, for example, for maintaining the current level of reallocation of emission allowances that allow industrial companies to emit within the EU ETS system. Some representatives of human rights and anti-drug organizations and government councils left the meeting on the transfer of government agendas early after talks with Prime Minister Andrej Babiš, head of the government office Tunde Barta, and 4 ministers. They described the meeting as sad, undignified, a farce and absurd theater. The government approved the transfer of agendas last Monday. From July, departments and offices connected to 8 government councils are expected to move from the government office to 4 ministries. Experts have sharply criticized the plan, pointing out that the transferred issues concern several ministries at once and require cross-ministerial coordination. According to the cabinet, however, the new arrangement will be more efficient. The directors general of Czech television Hynek Chudárek and Czech radio René Zavoral have called in an open letter on Prime Minister Andrej Babiš to stop the discussion of draft laws on public service media. They are demanding the creation of a working group. According to them, decisions on the future of Czech radio and Czech television should not be the result of a unilateral political step, but of a broad public debate and cross-party agreement. Prime Minister Andrej Babiš says he has resolved his conflict of interest issues related to his assets well beyond the requirements of both Czech and European law. In a statement to the Czech news agency, Babiš said he no longer owns the Agrofert holding and will derive no benefit from it. He argued that the European Commission is obliged to respond to complaints filed by the Czech opposition and is therefore seeking further clarification from Czech authorities. He added that he expects the matter to be closed once the Czech side provides its response. And now let's look at the weather. On Thursday, clear or mostly clear skies are expected, with temporarily partly cloudy conditions in the northeast. Daytime highs between 20 degrees Celsius and 25 degrees Celsius.
Speaking at the United Nations Security Council in New York, Czech Foreign Minister Petr Macinka used his address not to focus on any single crisis, but on the broader question of how international order can survive in a more fractured world. His speech was a clear defense of diplomacy and the role of international institutions, as Folimanka reports.
Foreign Minister Petr Macinka said that countries like the Czech Republic have a historic, deeply rooted understanding of what happens when the international order begins to break down.
Central Europe knows very well what a world looks like when rules between major powers cease to apply. In this world, in which smaller states cease to be subjects of history and become merely the space through which history passes.
He acknowledged that the United Nations organization is far from perfect and that its structures still largely reflect the geopolitical realities of 1945 rather than today's world. But he argued strongly that abandoning or sidelining the UN would be a dangerous mistake.
The alternative to an imperfect United Nations may not be a better world. It may be a return to a new concert of great powers, a world in which most nations will not sit at the table, but will themselves become items of the menu.
A major theme of the speech was what Petr Macinka described as a growing breakdown in communication between rival powers. The Security Council, he said, must not become a place where countries simply deliver prepared speeches past each other.
History teaches us that major conflicts do not begin only with aggression. They also begin with miscalculation, with the loss of communication, and with the conviction that others no longer need to be listened to. As great powers need allies, but great powers also need to hear how the rest of the world perceives their actions.
Petr Macinka also warned against ideological certainty and the temptation for powerful states to believe they alone represent the correct path for humanity. Drawing on Central Europe's own historical experience, he suggested that unchecked power, whether military or ideological, eventually leads to coercion rather than cooperation. At the same time, Petr Macinka challenged the assumption, often heard in international debates, that a so-called multipolar world is automatically a safer or fairer one.
Small states are not seeking a world without great powers. What smaller nations seek is a world in which even great powers are capable of accepting limits to their own power.
So, Czech Foreign Minister Petr Macinka didn't single out any particular country by name in his speech, but his message was clear. For countries like the Czech Republic, diplomacy, restraint and functioning international rules are not abstract diplomatic concepts. They remain essential safeguards in a world where history can still be shaped by power.
My thanks to Vít Pohanka for that report. The Czech Senate celebrated 30 years of existence in a special ceremony on Tuesday evening. But what has the upper house of parliament actually achieved in the last 3 decades, and could talk of abolishing it ever become reality? Ian Willoughby discussed those questions with political scientist Petr Just.
The Czech Senate was established by the Czech Constitution of 1993, but in 1996, when it actually came into being, there wasn't universal enthusiasm. Why was there resistance to the Senate?
The Senate's disadvantage was that it was something new. Although we were kind of re-establishing the bicameral system which existed already during the interwar period, not many people, of course, remembered this era. So for many people, the Senate in 1990s was a genuinely new institution, and they started to question, do we really need something new if it hasn't existed until now and we've been doing quite well? And before it was established, in the period between the constitutional wording, which was from 1993 and 1996, there were a debate whether the constitution still shouldn't be amended, and before the Senate even gets into existence, whether it shouldn't be expelled from the constitution. The debate sparked around mainly these financial issues, so people were debating or hearing debates how much the new chamber will cost, how many limousines will need to be bought for the officers, how many offices it will take, how many palaces it will take. But there was very little discussion about what the Senate actually does.
Well, one reason that it was set up was to act as a stabilizing institution. How successful do you think the Senate has actually been over the last 3 decades?
The important thing when talking about the Senate as a stabilizing institution is that it is supposed to serve in the time of crisis. And the time of crisis, they come, of course, very rarely. Like if you're establishing the fire department, you have to establish the fire department even in the time when there is no fire. Of course, many people could say in the 1990s that the Czech Republic was in quite politically or relatively politically stable situation, but you never knew what may come. You never knew if sometimes in future the Senate will not be needed to balance the power of the lower chamber and therefore to balance the power of the government, which is accountable to the lower chamber. So in my opinion, the Senate is and has been playing this role even when it was waiting for a certain period of crisis. And we see that it can have a positive impact on the stability of the constitutional system, because when we compare it, for example, with the events in Hungary or Slovakia, where they have a unicameral parliament, we see that the whole political scene, the whole political constitutional arena is in the hands of one ruling majority, which has the majority in the only existing chamber, parliamentary chamber. If anyone in Czechia would like to execute the similar radical political and constitutional reforms like Orbán did in Hungary in the past 16 years, that person would have to have the majorities in both chambers. So it is in some way a prevention that no illiberal reforms pushed by just one political party or one coalition would be implemented without any broader consensus.
My final question, the Prime Minister at present, Andrej Babiš, he says that the Senate is pointless. He'd like to see it abolished. I presume that's a very unlikely scenario, given that the Senate would actually have to vote against itself or vote itself out of existence.
This opinion is not original one. It's not for the first time that we would hear about the need to abolish the Senate. Andrej Babiš is repeating the claims that many politicians before him did. Of course, it is very unlikely because you need the consensus of the both chambers, the 3/5 consensus of the both chambers to make any constitutional amendment. But on the other hand, we see that Andrej Babiš is now changing his rhetoric a little bit. He's now emphasizing the need to focus on Senate elections in the upcoming fall and the partial renewal of the Senate that would come in October, because he feels that now when he has the majority in the Chamber of Deputies, he of course feels that the Senate in today's composition, which has a different majority than is his ruling majority in the Chamber of Deputies, could actually block or at least delay some of the legislation that his government wants to impose.
Political scientist Petr Just speaking there to Ian Willoughby. A reminder that you're with Radio Prague International, coming your way from the Czech capital. It's time now to head to a Prague retreat with Vít Pohanka, and this time he's taking you to Folimanka Park in the Czech capital.
Hello and welcome to Prague off the beaten track. Today I am taking you to a place that I think until recently few visitors to Prague have ever heard of, and you will hear in a short while why I think that it probably is going to change. It's called Folimanka, and it's a park tucked between Vinohrady, Nusle and Newtown. It lies on the northern, quite steep slope of the Botič Valley, where the stream of this name flows on its way towards the Vltava River. Today it is a place known especially for its open-air playground and sports hall of the same name, but long before children played here or athletes trained in the local sports hall, vines and apricot trees covered these sunny hillsides, and deep below them lies something very different, a Cold War bunker that recently became part of a global literary mystery after American author Dan Brown set part of his latest novel, A Secret of Secrets, right here beneath Folimanka. And that, I think, may actually change the fact that very few people heard about Folimanka before. From the practical point of view, I got here from the IP Pavlova metro station. It's quite a short walk, I think about 10-15 minutes. And now I'm going down a rather steep slope, as I mentioned, and different sets of stairs. Perhaps it's a good time to tell you something about how this place became what it is today. So, the story of Folimanka goes back a long way, all the way to the 14th century, when this area was covered with vineyards, like many other places around Prague, which are within the city today, as you might have heard in some of the previous episodes of Prague of the Beaten Track. In fact, the name itself comes from a Jakub Foliman, a burgher from Prague's old town, who owned the land and planted vines here back in the 14th century. Later, in the 15th century, the sunny southern slopes were famous for their apricot orchards. Over the centuries, different owners came and went, and by the 18th century, there stood a small country estate surrounded by trees and gardens. One of the best-known owners was aristocrat Jakub Wimmer, who turned the property into an English-style park in the early 1800s, repairing old paths, planting new fruit trees and giving the area something of a peaceful character it still has today. The estate survived well into the 20th century, though its purpose changed several times. After World War I, the former estate started to serve as a children's orthopedic pavilion, part of a children's hospital. However, due to organizational complications and buildings elsewhere, the house fell into disrepair and was eventually demolished in the 1960s. And it was around that time that Prague was building one of the most ambitious engineering projects, the unmissable Nuselský most, or Nusle Bridge, which now I can see span above the present park, some 40 meters above the present park. So when the bridge was completed in 1973, the city decided to turn the surrounding slopes on the Vinohrady, northern side of the valley, but facing south, into a public green space. And that's how the present Folimanka Park was born, a kind of mix of lawns, trees, fountains and playgrounds that turn what had once been a vineyard and construction site into one of Prague's most cherished urban oases. So while I'm telling you this story of Folimanka, I've actually descended along the steps that lead to the Folimanka shelter. And that is the place where Dan Brown placed some of the most dramatic scenes in his latest novel, Treasure of Treasures. But since I don't want to spoil your fun if you decide to read the book, let me just stick strictly to the facts about this mysterious underground structure without betraying what sort of activities CIA, according to Dan Brown's novel, was doing here or is still doing here. So the facts are that the Folimanka shelter was built in the 1950s during the tense years of the Cold War. It was a classified project, naturally kept strictly secret for decades. The first building plans date back to 1952, and according to the records, the shelter was completed in 1962 at a cost of nearly 6 million Czech crowns, which doesn't sound like much these days, but it was a huge sum for the time. It was built into the rocky hillside using and expanding an older World War II air raid tunnel, originally meant to protect civilians from Allied bombing. About 20 meters underground, the shelter was designed to withstand the shockwave of a nearby explosion and keep more than 1,000 people alive for 3 full days in case of nuclear or chemical attack. It's in fact a network of concrete corridors that covers more than 1,300 square meters, making it the largest underground facility in Prague's second district. Inside there are wells for drinking water, toilets, a small medical room and even 2 makeshift morgues. 3 ventilation units could purify the air, while a diesel generator from 1955 supplied electricity and powered the pumps and fans. The shelter has one main entrance, two emergency exits and several escape hatches leading to the surface. One of them, quite surprisingly I think, next to the ladies' toilet in the park above. Although the shelter was kept secret for decades, it was finally handed over to the city of Prague in the 1990s and opened to the public in 2014. And if you want to visit it, there are occasional guided tours, even in English, but only on certain dates, which you can easily find if you search for Folimanka shelter in your internet browser, and you'll get the English pages with the opening times and tour dates. Unfortunately for me, there's no guided tour today, but I have to say I saw, as I came to the shelter, I saw the doors open, and there was a guard that politely refused to talk to me, but allowed me to photograph the kind of entrance corridor and gave me a brochure which actually gives me information that you can find online as well. And as I was telling you this, I've come to the Folimanka Sports Hall, a building from the 1970s that serves as the home of USK Praha, the University Sports Club of Prague. And it's known especially for its basketball team with a long and proud tradition, but also a judo team. They've got a kind of their base here, Prague base here, of really top level basketball players and judo fighters. Nevertheless, I think that for most people from this area, and not just from this area, from other parts of Prague, what's most interesting are the playgrounds and the skate park that I'm passing through just now. Normally, and especially on weekends, lively spaces where local kids, students and families can spend their afternoons right here under the shadow of the Nuselský most, or the Nusle Bridge, which I think would be actually worth an episode for itself. So I will keep that in mind. However, I'm here, I have to say, on a kind of grey weekday October morning. The sky is overcast. There are not many people here right now. But if you are a visitor of Prague and want to find a quiet place for reflections, a quiet walk, you can definitely come here. And what's also noteworthy and something that you can appreciate on a even on a grey day like when I'm here, are the sculptures that are scattered around the park. They definitely give this otherwise maybe slightly ordinary green space an artistic touch, a kind of open air, smallish but still gallery hidden right beneath the bridge. I suppose the most famous is probably the Bear Family by sculptor Václav Frýdecký, a charming group of 3 sandstone bears that children love to climb on and parents love to photograph. Frýdecký is, by the way, the author of another piece nearby, a graceful figure called the Gymnast, which fits perfectly with the park's sporting atmosphere. A bit further on, you can come across other works like Skateboarder, Undressing and Basketball Player, which actually stands right in front of the sports hall that I talked about. Together they form an unusual but rather cohesive collection that connects art, play and everyday life. And maybe that's what makes Folimanka Park so special. It's not just a patch of green under a bridge, but a place where history, sport and art all quietly coexist. Along the way, let me mention, I've already passed a couple of refreshment kiosks. Both of them are closed now. No wonder, it's off-season. But the larger one normally opens at 11 a.m. even at this time of year. And part of it, there are public toilets. And here's something worth noting. They are totally free of charge, open, and judging by their spotless condition when I stopped by, also well maintained. It may sound like a small thing, something obvious, but believe me, in a city like Prague, where most public toilets are paid and often accept cash only, so if you've got a card, they won't let you in, this feels like a very civilized touch. And I think it's just another reason why Folimanka Park stands out as one of the Prague's most welcoming green spaces. So, now I'm climbing up again, quite slowly, I have to say, to reach the crest of the Botič Valley. It's a really steep slope, so there are long stairs between the trees. Step by step, I'm leaving the green of the park behind and heading towards the Bastion, which perhaps isn't officially part of Folimanka Park, but is definitely connected with it, both geographically and historically. And now I see that the passage that is normally open directly from the park to the Bastion is closed for restoration works. So I will probably have to go back and get to the Bastion from the Horská Street. And why I do want to get there? Because from up there you get a completely different perspective of the whole area, the valley of Folimanka spread below, the Nusle Bridge above it, and the line of the Newtown fortifications, reminding you that this peaceful corner of Prague once stood right on the city's defensive edge. The Bastion itself is a beautifully restored remnant of Prague's Baroque fortification, part of the defensive walls built mainly in the 17th century to protect, in this case, the southern edge of the new town. And if you've been following Prague of the Beaten Track for some time, you may remember that in one of the earlier episodes I talked about Prague's Baroque fortifications elsewhere in the city, and this bastion was part of that very same system. For centuries, this solid structure, I think with its thick stone walls and in some cases also brick walls and angular shape, served purely military purposes, guarding one of the city's most strategic approaches from the Nusle Valley. Later it fell into disrepair, it was overgrown and closed to the public, and only in the past decade or two, I think, was it carefully reconstructed and made accessible from Folimanka Park through a new path and staircase, where I'm standing right now, but as I mentioned, right now it's closed, but it will open in spring 2026 again. Today the Bastion has a completely different life. It's a, I think, quite inviting terrace with views over Prague, a cafe and a quiet cultural space where you can sit among old walls that once defended the city, now protecting, in a way, its peace and beauty. What's really special about this place is the view from the Bastion terrace. You can see the whole Nusle Valley spread out below, with Vyšehrad rising proudly on the opposite side. And if you turn west, your eyes follow the panorama across the Vltava river, over Strahov and Petřín Hill. It's a perfect view and a perfect place to end this short walk through Folimanka Park. And finally, I think that perhaps it's not surprising at all that Dan Brown, this famous American author, found inspiration right here for some of the most mysterious scenes in his latest novel. It's not perhaps the most kind of intellectual piece of literature. You can easily find the reviews of more authoritative voices than mine, but it's definitely a novel that's already a bestseller. This place, with its layers of history, hidden tunnels and stunning views, really does spark imagination, as it did Dan Brown's and as it might yours.
And that trip to Prague's Folimanka Park with Vít Pohanka has brought us to the end of today's half-hour broadcast from Prague. You'll find us at radio.cz. Should you like to write to us, then write to english@radio.cz. We'll be glad to hear from you. This is Daniela Lazarová saying thanks for joining us today and take care.